So today we're going to talk about a wedding. Well, kind of like 3 weddings, 4 weddings, something like that. 4 weddings and a funeral. There's technically a funeral. So, as you probably noticed by the title card, this is going to be about The Corpse Bride, or Tim Burton's The Corpse Bride, which came out in 2005. Obviously, it's the same kind of stop motion animation that he's done for, James and the Giant Peach, and of course, Nightmare Before Christmas, which I will be reviewing a little bit later this month, or on Halloween itself, which is when that one will go up. Some Tim Burton movies I really like this one I really love, and Nightmare Before Christmas I love. There's a few other. I have not seen. Admittedly, I have not seen Frankenweenie. I will probably watch that at some point. I just haven't yet, and I think he also was involved in the Box Trolls, which again kind of looks interesting enough that I'll probably end up watching it at some point. I just at the time when they were coming out, I just wasn't all that interested in them. But Corpse Bride I love, and Nightmare Before Christmas obviously. So Corpse Bride, I brought out a little bouquet, which is just kind of going to go back here. There we go. And because there is a skeleton puppy in the movie, I has a skeleton puppy. I think it also glows in the dark, but we're not going to test that theory right now. So we're going to put him over here for now. In the movie, the dog's name is Scraps instead of Spot. This works. I also have a Morticia Addams shirt. Love Morticia Addams. It's from the same website where I get a lot of the princess shirts, because obviously it's like that same style. So I will try to remember to put a link in the video when I put this up. Or put a link in the comments. So, obviously, Corpse Bride, Tim Burton, musical music by Danny Elfman. You'd think this would qualify as kind of like a sequel to The Nightmare Before Christmas, or given the fact that they're technically alive, a prequel to The Nightmare Before Christmas. And then I know there's a theory that like Frankenweenie is like the prequel to that, and I'm just like, okay, sure, we can go with this. But I'm not going near that today. I'm not going to do theories for that. This is just going to be me talking about The Corpse Bride, which is just kind of one of the movies that like every year at Halloween, my dad and I watch it. This and Nightmare Before Christmas and a few other movies that we almost watch every year. There are a few Tim Burton movies that's like I've seen. Tim Burton's Alice in Wonderland, the first one. I have not seen the Return to Wonderland or Through the Looking Glass one. I've tried watching Sweeney Todd. No. I love Helena Bonham Carter, and Johnny Depp, regardless of things that have been happening recently, he is an amazing actor. No one can deny that, but things that have been happening recently, we'll leave that alone. But, I do love them as actors, and the rest of the cast in this is pretty dang good too, and I'll go over the cast list later. But when I've seen like the Charlie and the Chocolate Factory one that he did, which I don't know where to fall on that when it comes to that, because I love the original. Gene Wilder is amazing. Johnny Depp is kind of creepy in the role, but I'll admit that. So let's just get into The Corpse Bride before I go down the Johnny Depp and Tim Burton rabbit hole. So Corpse Bride. So it is set in this unnamed Victorian era town in England. So this would be like the mid to late 1800s or so. Because that's kind of during the reign of Queen Victoria, of course. And what we see is we are introduced to these 2 families. We're also introduced to the town, and the town is very much gray. Just like take sepia tone and put it everywhere. This town is just this epitome of gray and lifelessness, and we just see gray everywhere. The buildings are all gray or black and white-ish. It all is just like it came out of like a 19, just trying to figure out what color came into play, like 1940s-ish type movie where there's just like nothing but black and white everywhere, like the first part of like The Wizard of Oz. And what we see is we are introduced to these two families. One are the Van Dots, who their son is Victor Van Dot. And he is this, I don't remember if we ever get an exact age on him, I don't think. But he is this, him and his family are these nouveau riche fishmongers or fish merchants. Nouveau riche is, of course, the new rich. So they're very new into their money. They came from probably very poor background, and then they built up this fish market, fish merchants type thing, and they were able to make quite a bit of money. And now to the point where they are this kind of an eligible possibility to be married into this very high class family, which are the Everglots. Excuse me. And Victor, their son of the Van Dot family, is to marry Victoria Everglot, who is the daughter of, don't remember the parents' names, but I really don't care. The parents are just kind of both there for sets. Victor's parents are very demanding and very, I mean, both sets of parents are very, very strict. Both of them obviously have huge amounts of flaws. And the reason that this marriage is going through is because the Everglots are basically bankrupt. They're penniless nobles, and they need to marry the nouveau riche in order to keep their money, to keep their lifestyle. And so they've made this arrangement with the Van Dots to have their daughter marry their son. And it was a practice that happened a lot back then. It was, the rich would marry the rich, and then like if the nouveau riche came into the play, if they were, considered acceptable to marry into the noble high class bloodlines, then they would. And of course, Victor's mother is very much like, I knew I was always meant to be more than a fishmonger's wife. I was always meant for better things. I always knew that. So we get this concept of like, it's like I always knew I was meant for better things, and this is where I'm supposed to be, and all of that. And Victoria is, of course, the Everglot's daughter. She's not really. She's more interested in wanting to have like an actual kind of a romantic relationship with Victor, more just because of the fact of like, she's always dreamed about like actually being in love with the man she wants to marry. And Victor is this very timid, very, very much has kind of had like the very controlling parents type thing, as I mentioned. And so he doesn't really know how to make decisions for himself to a degree, is kind of where that puts. But so they're, so we're introduced to the town. We're also introduced to this other character that seems to be new to the town. I'll go over him a little bit later. His name is Lord Bacchus, and he's kind of our bad guy for this movie. And what ends up happening is, Victor and his parents go over to the Everglot's house, and Victor and Victoria end up meeting. First they meet her parents, and Victor's father, does this stupid thing where he tries to like flirt/compliment Victoria's mother, which doesn't go well because she's just like, yeah, no, I'm not buying it. And then Victoria's father is like, like trying to smile, like, hi, like in a just very awkward and disturbing. And because it's like, be nice to the guests, sweetie, we need their money. And so it's just like the two sets of parents seem to be getting along okay-ish. And, they go off, and Victor finds his piano, and he starts playing on the piano, and Victoria hears it, and she comes down from her room where she's been, stitched into a corset to the point where she can barely breathe, type of thing. Mother's like, make that corset tighter. I can hear you speak without gasping, type of thing. And corsets can be very uncomfortable. I will attest to this. But of course, what ends up happening is Victoria comes down and she sees Victor playing on the piano and everything. And I love stop motion animation movies. I love how they're done. I love just how they pay so much attention to detail and everything in regards to, because like as Victor's playing the piano, you actually see like, I think they actually mapped out that like he's actually pushing the correct keys to make the music that would actually be coming out of the piano at the time. Which I love when they do that with that. I love when they do that with like animated movies where like you can actually like they're actually, for the most part, it's like guitar or violin is a little bit harder to do, but like for a piano, you know, you can kind of like try to match that as best as possible. And I like how they do that with that. And what ends up happening is Victor sees Victoria and he just kind of like falls off the chair and like almost knocks over this little vase of a flower that's sitting there and everything. And then he like tries to flirt with her, but it doesn't go very well. And Victoria is like, "Oh, I've, you know, my mother never let me learn how to play the piano, and it's improper for a young woman. Music is too passionate." And she's just like this very like soft spoken, like drilled into her entire life that she is supposed to be very soft spoken, that it is her job to marry to keep the family at their current social level and everything. That's basically what she's been raised to do her entire life. Her parents basically were the same way. And it's like you don't have much of an opinion on anything, or much of opinion that matters on anything until you're like married, and then even then it's like you must defer to your husband, because like we get the opening song of the movie, which is called According to Plan, which is the two sets of parents like singing singing and such like that. So we get like the backstory of what's going on. It's like, oh, we're penniless, oh, we have money, Mary and everything. And the mother, Victoria's mother, is just like, "Do you think your father and I love each other? Do you think we even like each other? Marriage is a partnership." At the time frame, in the Victorian era, marriage for love was a very rare thing to have happen. A lot of the times, even leading up to that time frame in the era, barring like you being like a peasant and marrying another peasant, yeah, you wanted to try to marry higher up in society, so your family would be better off, but it was not very common for people to get married for love. It was, arranged marriages, matchmakers, this family marries into this family to keep the status quo. The song According to Plan is, it's like, if everything goes according to plan, then, the Van Dots will now be able to like rub elbows with the rich and the high society and everything. And, the Avogots will get to, get a fortune that they'll be able to use again. And, like that marriage contract that comes into play. And, so that's, the opening song, of course. And, what ends up happening is, Victor and Victoria, they meet and they kind of seem to connect a little bit. And, they just kind of have like this sweet little moment and everything. And then, then it cuts to, now they have to go and do the rehearsal for the wedding. And that's where the pastor, Pastor Coleswell, who is voiced amazingly by Christopher Lee, and is this tall, skinny man and everything, and very intimidating type character. And it's it's time for the wedding rehearsal, and then we have 3 hours later. SpongeBob reference. But what ends up happening is 3 hours later, Victor can still not get the vows right, because there's like these certain vows that he's supposed to say. And I will go over them later because they're actually very sweet vows. But I'll go over them a little bit later when Victor actually, means them. And, there's like a candle and a cup of wine and like all this other stuff. And he just like, he keeps messing up, and, he gets scolded by the pastor, and like Victoria is there, and she's just like so sweet and like just waiting patiently and everything. And, so they have all this going on, like their parents are there in the background watching. And like the Avogots have like this really old maid, Hildegard, and like they have this really snooty butler that it's just like the butler keeps acting like the Van Dots are worth less than like the dust in the house, because they're this nouveau riche, and like he's been serving the Avogots for probably his entire career. Probably like his father served their, his father and his father and his father type of a thing. So it's, it's like they have this loyalty to the family, but that kind of goes out the window later, which is funny. And, during the whole time with the practicing and everything, because Victor keeps making a fool of himself because he can't remember the lines and the vows and everything. And the pastor is just like, do you, he's got like this giant staff. He's like, do you at least have the ring? And Victor's like, I got the ring. And then he drops the ring and it rolls over Victoria's mom's dress, and then he has to grab it. And then he accidentally sets her on fire, which is funny. And what ends up happening is there's this other character, as I mentioned, that is Lord Bacchus, who is kind of this, he's kind of the one of the villains in the piece. And he comes in and he just like claims that, oh, I haven't the head for dates. Apparently I'm a day early for the wedding and everything. And like he, is like trying to like charm the parents a little bit, charm Victoria's parents a little bit. And, he's the one that like actually puts out the fire on the dress after everybody makes a big fool of themselves trying to pour it out. And, put it out. And then Victor gets scolded by the pastor and he runs off into the forest and everything. He was like, young man, learn your vows. And Victor runs off into the forest. And then we cut to like a couple of hours later or so. Like Victor is just kind of like still downhearted, distraught, all this other stuff. And he ends up, he wanders into the forest and, he ends up, practicing his vows between like these trees and everything. And he, practicing all of that, like he actually kind of is like, he's like determined to actually do it right, because like he, at one point he pulled like out of his pocket, he pulled like the flower that Victoria had given him and the ring. And he's like, I at least have to try. And he's, so he's like practicing to get the vows right and like building up his confidence and everything, like talking to like a tree and like a stump and like all this other stuff. And he does his vows perfectly, and he puts the ring onto what looks like to be an uprooted root. And it ends up then moving and coming alive, and like it grabs him and like, it won't let go of him, and he, rips it off, and it's actually like a bony hand with like the ring on the ring finger, and he's just like freaking out, which I don't blame him. I would be freaking out too in this circumstance. And then he ends up during this time frame, he ends up, he's like gets chased through the forest because like the like something digs its way out of like where the snow was in the, in the graveyard area by the forest, and it like digs through its way out, and it's like this, corpse in a wedding dress, corpse bride. And she like lifts up her veil at one point and she's like, I do. And then she's just like chasing him and everything, and like chasing him through the forest. And then she ends up like quartering him on this bridge that leads into town. And she's just like has him kind of like pinned to the bridge. She's like, you may kiss the bride. And I'm just like, oh my God, that would freak me out if that happened. And yeah, no, that would be a very freaky thing that would have happened. So I don't blame Victor for being freaked out in this case. And, he then faints, and then he wakes up in the land of the dead, where he then learns that her name is Emily, and that the corpse bride's name is Emily. And she's like, oh, silly, we're married now. And she's like showing him the ring and everything. And, he's like seeing all these other corpses around him that are all like talking and everything. And, moving, which is already kind of creepy. And like, they're all dressed in like different era of clothing and stuff like that. There's like a thing that's like a play off on Napoleon, and one that's like a play off on like some other type of a general or something like that. And like, there's like a head waiter at a bar that is literally a head that is carried around by like cockroaches or something. And, Victor is just like freaking out again. I don't blame him. And, he's just like, what is going on here? I want some questions. And he's like, he's like, I want questions here. No. What is it he does? He goes like, I have answers and I want some questions. And like, he's like holding the Napoleon type character has like a sword that goes from him. He's like holding that. And then the Napoleon type character is like, you want some answers, not questions. You want some answers. Yes, thank you. Drops it. And like, so he gets, and then we get this whole musical thing that is Remains of the Day, which is sung by kind of like this Bojangles type character, which is fun, which is played by Danny Elfman. And we get this whole song that's basically like what happened with Victoria. Or not with Victoria, with Emily, with the corpse bride. And it's like, it's basically, it's like the chorus is like, die, die, we all pass away. And so it's just like funny, and like the skeletons are singing, and like everybody else is singing and dancing and having fun and everything. Like the land of the dead is a lot more lively than the land of the living. And like Victor's watching this, and we find out that like when Emily was young, she had been part of this kind of wealthy family, and she had fallen in love with this, very charming stranger that came to town. and her parents had, said no. So he's just like, well, then, the stranger's just like, how about we elope and everything? And, you need your mother's wedding dress and a bag of, the family jewels and a bag of gold. And she's, so enthralled with him that she does this. And then he killed her, killed her in her wedding dress, when they were supposed to elope. And she's been waiting, ever since for a groom, which is, she's claiming that that's what now Victor is. He is her groom. And so far, that seems to be going okay in regards to that logic, because I'm not going to argue with a corpse. I'm not going to argue with a corpse that can move and talk in a land full of other corpses that I can't really hurt. And like Victor runs out of this like pub area that he's in, and he ends up running through the land of the dead, and like Victoria is like kind of chasing him, like, Victor, darling, and just like, so we see like this like little funny area, and there's like a second hand shop with like a bunch of hands that point, and like she's following them, and like Victor ends up running into this like spider that can talk, and she's like, oh, a married man, I'm a widow myself, the black widow spider. And Emily has like this this maggot that lives in her head, because of course she's a corpse, so she has maggots. Has this maggot that lives in her head that like either pops out of her ear, or like occasionally make her eyeball pop out of her head and pop in her eye, and such. So she's just like arguing with that, and she's like trying to find Victor, and Victor's running away. And, at one point he ends up kind of climbing this like cliff area, and then like Emily like helps him over the edge, and she's like, you should have just used the stairs. And he's just like kind of freaking out and everything, and like she just kind of like calms him down a little bit. And they end up having this kind of sweet little conversation where, she's like, explains, oh, my name's Emily and everything. And that's where we get that, because like the others kind of refer to her as like the corpse bride, because that's what she is, of course. And what ends up happening is she gives him a wedding present, and it's a box of bones, which would freak me out too. And then the bones like roll out of the box and like form together, and they form into a skeleton puppy. Skeleton puppy. And the puppy then like gives, Victor its collar, and he looks at it and he's like, Scraps? And the dog's like, yeah, I'm Scraps. I'm the dog you used to have when you were a kid. And so he's like remembering Scraps, and Scraps had been this dog that he had when he was a kid, obviously, because he fed it like table scraps. That's where the name comes from. And like his parents didn't really approve of Scraps to a degree, but they still let him keep him. And like Victor's just like happy to have Scraps, so he's like petting him and everything, and he makes him do tricks to sit, roll over, play dead. Scraps, huh? Sorry about that. And he's like talking with Emily a little bit more, so they're like getting a little bit to know each other and everything. And Scraps seems to like Emily, so we get this cute little thing there. And then Victor at one point is just kind of like coming up with this idea. He's like, well, mother never really approved of Scraps, and Emily's like, well, would she have approved of me? And he's like, he starts forming an idea in his head, and he's like, probably not, but you know what? You should meet my parents. We're married now. You should meet my parents. She's like, oh, good. Where are they buried? He's like, they're not buried. They're still alive. She's like, oh, But let's go see Elder Gutnick, who is this kind of like very old skeleton that has like a crack in his head, and he like lives in this like tower that has like a huge library in it that like has like all of these like ancient tomes of magic and sorcery and like dead laws and stuff like that and everything. Like they go and talk to him and everything, and like he gives off this like appearance of being like really scary and everything, and like creeps Victor out. But like Victor is still like very polite. He's like, nice to meet you, which is just funny. And like Victoria or Emily explains like, well, we would like to go and go visit the land of the living. And he's like, Elder Gutnick. So it's like, okay, I can arrange that. And he like makes like this weird potion, and then he just drinks the potion, and which is kind of pointless because he's a skeleton, so it's not like he can eat anything anyway. And he's like, okay, and then he like takes this raven and he like pops an egg out of a raven, which I'm pretty sure is like an Edgar Allan Poe reference because it's a raven. And it's just like, pop, egg. And then he like takes the egg and he's like, okay, when you want to come back, you have to say the word hopscotch. Hopscotch, yes. Now, I'm going to throw this in here because it sets up a joke for later. I have not seen Squid Game. I don't know if I will see Squid Game. We'll see about that. I might not, I don't know. But what happens later with the payoff of this joke is, because obviously this is done, 15, 16 years before Squid Game, but still. And what happens is, like, he takes the egg and he cracks it and he sends them into the real world, into the land of the living. And, Emily is just like, she's like so happy to be out in the real world, out in, the living world. And she's, it's like, it's been so long since I've been underneath the moonlight. And she's just like so happy and everything. And she's just kind of like, floating and dancing around the kind of glen area where they are. And at one point, like, she's dancing around, like, her leg gets caught on a root and she, like, falls over. And she, like, has to, like, go back and grab her leg before Victor notices, which is just funny. And Victor's like, how about this? You stay here, and I'll go prepare Mom and Dad. And then I'll come back and get you, and then you can meet them. She's like, okay, and she, like, sits and waits. And, Victor runs off, and he runs to the Evagot's house. During this time frame in the real world, we have been, during this time frame in the land of the living room, in the land of the living, the Evagot's and the Van Dots have kind of been, kind of getting to know each other a little bit. And Lord Bacchus is, going to stay at the Evagot's house and everything. And he ends up bringing in the, like, the town crier, because they have a town crier. And he's like, read me today, tell me today's headlines that you just, told, everyone in town. And, like, the town crier, because he's the town crier, is, like, still ringing the bell, and he was like, Victor Van Dot seen on bridge, kissing mysterious woman, and then running off with her into the night, and just, like, everybody's like, huh? And then he was like, and now for the brothers, that'll be enough, leave. So he just, like, heads off. I was like, and the father, even, Victor's father is even just like, that can't be true. How it is, it's a slow news day. The town crier needs something to cry about. Just like, I just find that so funny. That joke will probably never get old as long as there is cable news. And what ends up happening is, of course, so Victor's parents go off to try to see if they can find him and everything. And then Victor actually ended up kind of making his way to the Evagot's house, where he is, trying to get inside. But what ends up happening is, he hears Mr. Evagot saying, I was like, if I ever find that boy, I'll shoot him with my musket, or I'll strangle him. And the mother goes, your hands are too fat and his neck is far too thin. You'll have to use a rope. And so just, like, this funny moment there, which I just always find hilarious. And, like, Victor, like climbs into the balcony, like, climbs the balcony into, like, Victoria's room, which, at the time frame, Victor and Victoria, like, you couldn't have come up with slightly different names for them. Yes, I understand that because Queen Victoria was around, Victor and Victoria were extremely popular names for your children. But that doesn't mean that you want them marrying each other. I just, like, that's just confusing. You could have picked a different name for one of the kids, for either Victor or Victoria. But what ends up happening is, of course, Victor, like, climbs his way into, like, Victoria's room, and she's like, Victor, what are you doing here? And he's just like, I'm something bad has happened. I seem to find myself married. And, like, off in the forest, the maggot has, like, convinced / reverse psychologied Emily into leaving the forest and going into town to try to find Victor. And somehow she must have followed him, because she climbs her way over the balcony again to, like, where Emily's room is. And, so we see, like, Victor, like, holding Emily's face, and then we see, like, or holding Victoria's face, and then we see, like, Emily's, like, visage coming in by the window, which is just kind of like a creepy thing to have happen. And he's just like, I find myself married. And she's like, what? And then, like, Victoria comes in, or, like, Emily comes in, and she's like, oh, Victor, darling, there you are. Where are your parents? Who's she? And Victor is just, like, befuddled, and, like, Victoria is just very confused / frightened. Again, I don't blame the woman. You know, zombies weren't exactly a thing in Victorian era London at the time. And by a technicality, Corpse Bride is a zombie movie because they are walking, living dead. Even though they are not after your brains, which is at least somewhat, you know, reassuring. Dog. Oh. Come here. Debbie Pupper. Look, you is in movie. You is in the video. Me, baby. My bubbers. Oh, my bubbers. Oh, I love you. He's my baby. Baby. Love the baby. Pain in the butt, baby. Hi. He's like, I want on the bed, but there is lots of things on the bed that are breakable. So I as well leave room. Oh, you're fine. I love you. Dog left. But what ends up happening is, of course, you know, Emily then like introduces himself to, I'm his wife, and like shows Victoria the ring, and she's just like, what the is going on? And you know, just like this whole kind of argument ensues and everything, and then Emily just goes like, because they have to say hopscotch to get their way back, she just goes hopscotch, like this is like terrifying, like it's the most terrifying word you'll ever hear. And then like her and Victor vanish, and then her and Victor vanish, and then Victoria is just like, what the F just happened? And she like, I think she tried, I don't remember exactly what happened, but she tried to tell her parents something had happened, like something had happened to Victor, and like they don't believe her, and like they lock her in her room, and then she like scales down, like uses this quilt that she'd been making, like scales down the side and like gets down onto the ground, and she like runs to the church, and she like tries to talk to the pastor, and she's like, Pastor Coleswell, I need your help. And he's like, what is it, child? She's like, I need to know, is it possible for the living to marry the dead? And he's just like, it's wrong with you. and it was like, is wrong with you? And like they run off, or he, you know, drags her back to her house and like tells her parents she seems to be possessed, and you know, blah 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 blah. And they're just like, don't worry, we'll take care of her. And like they lock her in her room again, very much secure her in her room. And then they make this deal with Lord Bacchus, who he's actually like, oh, you know, he's like, oh, if she was my wife, she would want for nothing. And you know, and then it's like, well, your wife must be a very well taken care of woman. Sadly, I have no wife. There was a woman once, but she passed before we could marry. And it's just like, okay. And that's not, you know, confusing and or disturbing at all, is it? And what ends up happening is, you know, so just like, well, you can marry our daughter instead. And, you know, it's like, so they just like make that arrangement, and they tell Victoria, tomorrow night you will be marrying Lord Bacchus. And she's like, but what about Victor? Victor is no longer in the picture. And, you know, it's like he's run away. And, like, his parents are off doing whatever. And what ends up happening is Victor and Emily have, you know, returned to the land of the dead. And Emily is just like, you were with that other woman. You know, blah, 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 blah. And Victor's like, don't you see, you're the other woman. No, I'm your wife. She's the other woman. And, like, Elder Goodneck is in back, and I was like, she has a point. You are technically married to her, to Emily. Therefore, Victoria is the other woman. And Victor is just like, and like Emily storms out. And like she goes off. And Victor, you know, is like, Victor doesn't really know what to do at this point in time, admittedly. And, you know, what ends up happening is Emily goes off. And she's very sad, and then she gets kind of her own song, which is Tears to Shed, which is her talking about, like, comparing herself to Victoria. You know, it's like, you know, yes, she's, you know, she can feel, and, you know, do I not still feel pain? Do I not still shed tears? And, like, it's her singing, like, the maggot is there, and, like, the Black Widow spider are, like, her friends, and, like, they're singing with her. And so it's just, like, this very heartfelt song that happens. And, you know, at some point after she's done singing, she's like ended up back in the pub area, in the pub, and she's, sitting and playing on the piano and everything. And like Victor makes his way in, and they end up kind of bonding over playing the piano. And like Victor kind of like is like trying to apologize and everything. Like Emily's just kind of ignoring him, and they're like, kind of bond over playing the piano, where they do like dueling pianos, dueling on the piano with, because like Emily knows how to play piano and everything like that. So that's just something that they're like bonding over. And then, they kind of, apologize to each other a little bit. And Victor's like, I'm sorry for, for lying to you and tricking you, and that I'm sorry, and, all that type of stuff. And up in the real world, like his parents have been up in the land of the living. His parents have been off trying to find him. And their kind of, coach driver, who has had this like incessant cough the entire movie, actually dies. And then like every time that there's a new arrival, there's like this big kind of party that happens where they welcome the new arrival. And it's Mayhew, who is the driver, who is, kind of like the coachman for Victor's parents. And he's like, where are my parents? What's going on? What happened? What's going on with Victoria? And Mayhew's like, well, you see, Victoria has now been engaged to Lord Bacchus. And, is now that's going to happen, and they're going to get married tomorrow. And, all of that stuff. And Victor's like, oh. So he's like kind of, downtrodden, and he goes off. And, everybody's like welcoming Mayhew and everything. He's like, I feel better than I have in a long time. I don't have that stupid incessant cough anymore. And, so Victor is still kind of sad about, Emily, Victoria is going to get married to Lord Bacchus and everything. And at this point in time, Emily has kind of like gone off, and she's like talking to some of the other Land of the Dead people that are her friends. And this is when Elder Goodnick comes in, and he explains to her that, so you and Victor are technically not married because you are dead and he is alive. And the only way to actually formally seal this deal between the two of you would be to have it be that you both repeat your vows again, and then he must drink the potion of everlasting death or something like that, of like eternal death or whatever it is. He has to drink poison. And Emily's just like, I couldn't ask him to do that. I can't. And at this point in time, Victor kind of was like overheard this conversation, and like I think he was kind of worried about like Emily like trying to force him to do it, like forcing him to do the vows and then drink the poison so that way she could have him. And she's like, I can't make him do that. And Victor overhears this, and that's kind of like when he makes up his mind. He's like, well, Victoria's going to marry Lord Bacchus. And then Emily just actually did something rather sweet with the fact of like, she's not going to force me to do that. For the last, several hours or however long, it's like they've been under the impression that because he did his vows and then, put the ring on her finger and then, she said, I do, that they are, quote unquote, married. And that's kind of like revealed to be not true because of Elder Goodnick explaining that. And so they're just like, oh. He's like, and he comes in and he's like, you don't have, and he comes in because he overheard the conversation, and Victor comes in and he's like, you don't have to force me to do anything. And he like goes over to Emily and like helps her stand up. And he's like, you don't have to force me to do anything. Will you marry me? And so he basically proposes, and then they end up going to tell like everybody in the Land of the Dead. So it's like, okay, we're gonna have a wedding, and we're gonna move it upstairs. So they're gonna go to the Land of the Living. And there are things in these types of movies that always creep me out the most. And I understand that they would exist, but they always creep me out the most. In this, we see like two little kid skeletons at one point, and those always creep me out because that either implies that those kids died of something horrible or they were murdered. And I'm just like, that's just sad and disturbing. I mean, like, the dog probably died of old age. And, like a lot of the other people there, we see them having like very serious injuries. Like there's one guy who's like cut in half. There's obviously people that have been decapitated. There's people that have been stabbed. People that have just died naturally. But like the kids that are there that are skeletons are always the things that creep me out the most. And like this applies to so many other movies where you see like skeleton children. And I'm like, I understand that there's, that kids die, that there's horrible accidents that happen, that kids get sick and they die, that there are horrible people in the world that do horrible things to children and they die. And I understand that. But I always find it so disturbing when that's in a kid's movie. And this is rated PG, parental guidance suggested. And I'm like, I can see where the argument for PG-13 could be made, but you kind of want kids to see this a little bit, just to kind of understand certain things. But it's still just like, oh my God. But it was like, so they're just like, we're going to move the wedding upstairs. And then we get the big wedding song. And, this is kind of just like a fun song where it's like all the corpses singing again and everything. And, they're getting, they kind of like Victor's jacket has kind of like been ripped up a little bit. So like there's like the Black Widow and a bunch of her other spiders come down and like they help like sew his, suit back together and like make him look nice and neat and everything. And like he's got like the two general corpses with him, like the Napoleon one and the other general looking one. And then like Emily is like getting like her dress probably kind of like fixed up a fair amount. And, by probably some other spiders and some other people that are like helping get her dress a little bit better fixed up. And then there's like this giant, bulbous, disgusting looking wedding cake. And so it's like they're doing that. And like then they're all just like getting ready to head up to the real world. And up in the land of the living, what ends up happening is Emily, or Victoria, has been married to Lord Bacchus. And they're having this like big dinner type of a thing at the, Evagoth's estate. And, there's lots of people in town that are probably like the more higher ranked people in town or so. And like, not very good food and like a really, really tiny little wedding cake and everything. And Victoria is just kind of like staring off like, I can't believe this happened. She's still trying to get over the fact of like, the guy that I was supposed to marry yesterday is like married to a corpse. And now I'm married to this guy who I don't even like, but barely know, let alone like in the last, 12 hours or whatever. And so they have that. And then, Bacchus is going to make like a toast. And then out of the background, out of the fireplace, like erupts like these giant green flames. And like then all around them start like popping up the corpses, the dead people. And like they're all just like, ah! Which again, I don't blame them. I would be freaking out too if this happened. So no, I'm on the side of no, I don't blame them for freaking out for this. So it's just like funny. And like they're all just like, ah, like all freaking out and everything, like terrified. And like they all start running, like Bacchus like hides, and everybody just like, oh my God, what is going on? Like everybody in town starts freaking out because like the dead are walking among them. Like the town car is like this, just saying, the dead walk among us, and like just like running around. And like the dead people, like they recognize the people in the land of the living. So it was like Mayhew recognizes like the people that he had worked with at the fish merchants. And like there's this one corpse that kind of walks up to this little boy that we've seen a couple of times in like pass-throughs of the town. And he like looks at the little boy and like gets really close to him. And like the little boy is just kind of like, Grandpa? And then like hugs him. And like, the corpse and like, the dead grandpa then like hugs the little boy. And like everybody just kind of like, huh? And like Mayhew's coworkers that worked at the fish merchants, recognize him. So it's just like, oh, Mayhew. And like, so like that. And then like there's this old woman that we've seen multiple times. And like there's this, like she's got like a walker and she starts trying to like beat the skeleton with a walker. And like the skeleton is just like, dear, honey, sweetie, like saying her like different sweet names and like her name. And she's just like, ah? She's like, and then she's like, but you've been dead for however many years. And like we get like, I swear this is a callback to God of the Wind, because I know it is, because like he takes her and he like sweeps her. The skeleton has like a mustache kind of like Cary Grant does in Gone with the Wind and everything. He's kind of wearing like a nice suit, and he like grabs her and like sweeps her into his arms and like bends her over. He's like, frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn. And like, he kisses her, and that's just funny. Another just callback to that. It's just like, sure, we'll throw that in there. That's a fun little reference to that movie. And I have seen Gone with the Wind, and stand up, technically stunning movie, story wise for certain aspects of history. But so it's like, it was like everyone in town is just like, oh, these are our loved ones that have passed on. or a bunch of them are loved ones that's passed on. So they're just like, they're making their way to the church for the wedding. And the pastor tries to like make them leave the church and everything. It was like, "Begone ye demons from hell." And it was just like, "Hush, man, we're at a church." And they just walk right in. He's just like, "Huh?" And like he drops his staff, like, "What the frick just happened? Everything I've been told is a lie." like what the frick just happened here? And like, you know, they all come into the, you know, they're all coming into the church and everything. Like, you know, Elder Goodnick is going to be like the you know, the pastor that, you know, does everything. We never see Victor's parents again. They were in a carriage. The carriage wandered off. We don't know what happened to them. They're not relevant anymore. Victoria's parents have kind of been scared. And again, they're not that relevant anymore. But Bacchus has basically looked at Victoria and he's like, "Okay, so where's your dowry? As your husband, I am right to your dowry." And she's like, "I don't have any dowry. My marriage to you is supposed to save my parents from the poorhouse." And that was, you know, that was the deal that they had made with, you know, Victor's parents. You know, the marriage was supposed to save us from going to the poorhouse. My marriage to you is supposed to save them from going to the poorhouse. And he's like, "But I don't have any money." She's like, "And then I guess we're both unhappy with this marriage." And she kind of walks out and she like makes her way to the church because she kind of like followed the, you know, the corpses and the townspeople to the church. So it's, you know, it's like all these corpses and the townspeople in, you know, in the church, like with their family and everything, which I'm like, I guess that's one way to have a lot of people at the wedding. And, you know, Victor is standing up at the front and like Emily comes in and she's wearing, you know, this, you know, her dress has kind of been fixed up, as I said. So it's, you know, not as many holes in it and a little more sewn together. And she like walks her way down the aisle, and then her and Victor, you know, have this, you know, moment where they're talking, and he does the vows. And this is where I am going to do the vows because, as I mentioned, the vows are very sweet. And he finally gets them right. The vows are: "With this hand, I will lift your sorrows. Your cup will never be empty, for I will be your wine. With this candle, I will light your way in darkness. With this ring, I ask you to be mine." Which I just find that so sweet. Those are sweet vows. And, you know, I've been to a lot of weddings in my life, you know, well, sisters, aunts and uncles, not really so much cousins that much, well, cousins on some sides, but, you know, it's like, so I've been to a lot of weddings, you know, family friends that get married, and, you know, the vows are very nice and everything, but I kind of find something nice in these vows, because, you know, they just seem nice to me. I like them. And what ends up happening is, you know, Victor does his vows, and like Emily or like Victoria has kind of like made her way into the church, and she's kind of like just sneaking around the side a little bit, and Emily sees her. And, you know, Victor is just about ready to, you know, drink the poison, and he knows that it's poison. He knows what he's going to be doing. He knows what he's getting himself into, and he's getting ready to drink it. And Emily stops him. She like puts her hand over the goblet and like pulls it down and puts it on the table. And she does this great bit where she's like, "I was a bride. That was taken from me. And now I've taken somebody else's dream. And I'm not, you know," that quote is basically, that quote that I used there is the quote that's on the end of the video. And she like looks over at Emily, or at over at Victoria, and she like holds her hand out to Victoria, and like she brings Victoria over to Victor, and she's like, "I love you, Victor, but you are not mine." And, you know, kind of like does her blessing on this, you know, those two together instead of her and Victor, instead of herself and Victor. And this is when, you know, Lord Bacchus shows up, and he's just like, well, you know, as nice as that is, she is still my wife in regards to Victoria, because she is, by right, she is his wife. They haven't consummated the marriage or anything, but she is his wife. And then Emily recognizes Bacchus, and she's like, "You." And he's the one that, you know, murdered Emily so many years ago. And, you know, so we get like this whole moment through. So it's like all the corpses are just like, "Oh, you're the one that killed her." And, you know, as much as we love her, but you're the one that killed her. And, you know, there's this big kind of fight that ensues where, you know, Victor and Bacchus have like fight against each other. Like for some reason, Victor has to fight with like a fork. And like, you know, fighting against each other. And at one point, like Emily, like Victoria got away from him. Like Emily's kind of keeping Victoria off to the side to keep Victoria safe, because she doesn't want to see Victoria get hurt the same way that she got hurt by Bacchus. And what ends up happening is Emily, at one point, Victor is about to get stabbed by Bacchus, and Emily jumps in front of it, and she gets stabbed by him. She's a corpse. She's not going to die again. And she gets stabbed, and she just like, because she's like staring down Bacchus, and she like pulls the sword out of herself, and she points it at him, and she's just like, you have already ruined my life. Kind of like a thing, you've already ruined my life. I'm not going to let you ruin theirs as well. And Bacchus, I keep saying Bacchus, that's the god of wine. Bacchus is, well, very well then. And he like, gets ready to leave, and he like walks over and he like picks up the goblet, thinking that it's just like wine in the goblet. And he's like, oh, I'll just get one more thing over on them. And he like takes the goblet and he drinks it as he's leaving, and getting ready to go out the back. And he's like drinks it and then like drops it, and like the Elder Gutnick, like all the others are just like, all the corpses are like ready to attack Bacchus, because he's like, in like Elder Gutnick's sound, it's like, we're in their world, we have to abide by their laws. He like stops the other corpses from like trying to attack. And then Bacchus, he drank the poison, and then he's just like, goodbye, and then he's just and then he like dies, and like just kind of like turns into a corpse standing there. And then Elder Gutnick's just like, oh, no, go ahead. Like the others just like drag off Bacchus. And it's like they get the creepy version of new arrival. And she was like, that's not gonna go well for him. And like they drag off Bacchus to go and punish him, because it's like, A, he's the one that killed Emily years ago. B, he was going to do the same thing to Victoria. And C, he just tried to hurt both of them and Victor, and they like Victor. And Emily just kind of gave their blessing for Victoria. So there's like all of that going on. And so they're left in the last few that are left in the church. I think a lot of the people that were actually there are left at that point in time. I don't remember. But Emily, Victor, and Victoria are the last three that are kind of left there. And no, there's still a few other people left in the church. That's fine. I was trying to remember. But Victor and Victoria, Emily is like giving them her blessing, and she like takes off her ring and she puts it back in Victor's hands, and she's like, it's like, I want you to be happy. And, so it gives him her blessing for that. And then she goes and she walks to, the end of the aisle by the door, and she takes her bouquet and she throws the bouquet, and it actually is caught by, I don't remember who catches it, but it's caught by someone. And it's just like this funny one, because like the maggot was like next to the person, and it's just like, hi, drops that, runs away. And then like Emily is just kind of like standing there in the moonlight, and she begins to fade, and like her veil and her dress and then her seem to start turning into hundreds and hundreds of butterflies. And they kind of, they manifest out of her, and like she becomes the butterflies, and then she the butterflies start flying into the sky. And so it's kind of like this representation of Emily, she had all of this unfinished business and everything in regards to finding love and getting married, and now she's like come to terms with that, and now she's able to move on, and she like then is like kind of released and freed and everything. And Victor and Victoria kind of watch as they embrace, as Emily goes off. And I mean, like, this is not canon by any means, but I just always thought that it would be kind of nice if like whatever, like the first daughter that like Victor and Victoria have, like they name her Emily. At the very least, they got a really good story to tell their kids and their grandkids about how their wedding went. I mean, it's kind of like assume that Victor and Victoria then they did actually get married, and like maybe this is all just hypothetical. Like Victor and Victoria obviously are supposed to get married, and then they find Victor's parents or whatever, and his parents was just like, oh, thank God you did marry her, and then like they helped the Evagots and all that stuff, and like maybe they kept the family fish merchants life going and everything. And then we get cast list, the cast. And of course that is Johnny Depp as Victor Van Dot, Helena Bonham Carter as Emily, the Corpse Bride, Emily Watson, not Emma Watson, Emily Watson as Victoria Evagot. Tracy Ullman plays two characters. She plays Nell Van Dot, who is Victor's mother, And then she also plays Hildegard, who is the very elderly maid of the Evogots. And then we have Paul Whitehouse plays 3 characters. He plays William Van Dot, who is William's father. He plays Mayhew, who is the Van Dot's, chauffeur, coachman. And then Paul, the head waiter, who is literally a severed head, who's the guy at the bar. Then we have Joanna Lumley as Madeline Evogot, so Lady Evogot, Victoria's mother. And then Albert Finney plays 2 characters. He played, well, kind of 2 characters. One of them's like 1 line. Plays Finis Evogot, who is Victoria's father. In the quotes it says, Victoria's abusive, toad-like, unloving father. And then he also does, there's like a moment where like his grandfather like pops up as like one of the dead that pops up. And then we have Richard E. Grant as Bacchus Bittern, who is of course Lord Bacchus. Christopher Lee as Pastor Coleswell. Matthew Goh as Elder Goodnick. Let's see here. That's not really. And then we have Danny Elfman as Bojangles and various other, characters that sing and everything like that. But he's mainly the Bojangles character that sings. And of course, that's about it. There's not really too much else in there for any other major actors or so that I wanted to point out. Danny Elfman, of course, he wrote the score and the music for the movie, with help from, Tim Burton and everything, and the other directors that were involved. I apologize if you can hear the dog barking in the background. Hi. Are you going to help Mama? Are you going to help the Mama? Rainy, I don't know, but I am going to whine and whine and whine, Mommy. Yeah, I know you're gonna whine. He's like, I want the window. Hi. He's like, I see us on the screen, Mommy. Yeah, I know. You don't kiss, I know. Hi. I love you. You're my puppy. He's like, I don't care. I leave. Oh, calm down. You're fine. I'm almost finished. But what ends up happening is, of course, that's basically where that goes with the story. That's the cast. And then in regards to kind of like just like behind the scene type stuff, of course, it's like they have to make all the sets and they have to make all the, the stop motion is, move one bit, do a frame, move one bit, do a frame. All of that, I find stop motion animation to be quite charming. Sometimes, I know that at times they like enhance it with stuff in regard to like, we can do certain things, but then we have to like enhance it a little bit with like computer generated images and stuff like that with the CGI, which, it's still the same charm is there, but there's like a few little tweaks that's like, we can't quite, they do as much in camera as they can, obviously, or as much as they can do with like fades or overlaying, but there's a few things here and there that's like, yeah, you kind of got to do a little bit more. We got to do a little bit in the computer just to like enhance certain things type of a thing, which is understandable when it comes to certain things like that. And I do like shows and movies and like this type of stuff where they can, where they do a lot of in-camera tricks to make it work. Certain things that happen in the show or in the movie or like things that they can do on set. And in this case, they just miniaturize it and such. To do it, and like most of the statue or most of the figures that they used were I think are about maybe they're supposed to be like 11.5 or so, somewhere between like 10 to 12 inches tall, give or take the character, of course. The smaller ones obviously being quite a bit smaller, but like the bigger ones are of course there. And they have like so many different facial expressions that they make that they have for the different characters and all of that fun stuff that they use there. And it's a very time-consuming process because they have to record all the lines after they get the script written, and then they record all the lines, and there's probably some different things that come out of that, and then they have to then film all of the motions and everything. And yeah, some of the things can be a little bit more like if they don't have to do too much with the face, if it's just like a character moving, that's one thing. But then there's other stuff where it's just like, oh, they're gonna, we got to get like all the different facial tics and everything like that happen, and hair in different, disarray depending on certain circumstances, them in different costumes, and different things like that. So I just love how I've just always loved the stop motion animation. I love it with this. I love it with with James and the Giant Peach, with Nightmare Before Christmas, with the stop motion animations like the Rankin and Bass stuff for the like all the different Christmas movies and specials that they've done and everything. Like I've always just loved stop motion animation. It's always just been something that always just is just like I just enjoy watching it. And like I know that sometimes for like computer animated movies they are kind of trying to try to see if they can like recreate that, but I also just like them doing it in and of itself because it kind of keeps that art form alive, which I just like. So that's what we have there for The Corpse Bride. Again, it's one of my favorite Halloween movies. And of course I'll still have Nightmare Before Christmas, which will be out on Halloween itself. And then I'll have 2 videos after that that'll be kind of Dia de Muertos videos. So that's what we have. I thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope you have a nice rest of your day. And go watch The Corpse Bride if you haven't watched it for a while, because the songs are really fun and morbid. Bye. I was a bride. My dreams were taken from me. But now I've stolen them from someone else. I love you, Victor, but you are not mine.